And so here's Annette from Orkney arrived as well. Hello, Annette. We've just put recording on and we're just starting. And I'm sure there'll be a few more folk arriving that I'll let in as they come. My name's Rob Campbell. My job today is just to give a very brief introduction, which I've pretty much done, and tell you that we've got a QA session set up and you're all muted. So if you've got any questions, as you either aim to cover them at the end, but if it's a really pressing question, I might intervene, but I'll keep my eye on the Q&A, and I'll hand over to Helena and Andrea, who are going to run today's session. So enjoy, and over to you.
Okay, thanks, Rob. The first thing I'm going to do is kick off and apologise a little bit, because some of you may have been missold to, because I saw the publicity and it referred to us as experts. I'd like to just refute that. We're not experts. We are passionate amateurs who have spent 10 years trying to find ways of proving the value of the work that we do. So I wouldn't want anyone to assume that we were an expert in anything. Scarred from experience more than an expert. Anyway, so my name's Helena Moss. I'm actually the Regeneration and Funding Group Manager at East Riding of Yorkshire Council. So we sit within Planning and Economic Regeneration Directorate at the Council. And my colleague, Andrea Turton, do you want to just say hello, Andrea?
Hi, yeah, good morning, everybody. I'm Andrea Turton, and I'm a Local Growth Programme Manager, and I firmly sit in Helena's domain, with social value as one of my key areas of work.
Okay, fab. So we were asked to sort of do this because we have spent, well, a little over 10 years trying to push the social value rock up a hill. So we've probably got a bit of experience that's worth sharing. Andrea, do you want to move the slides on? So my background is, I have a community development background. And I was brought to the council in 2007. I relocated here from the north of England. So I had previously been working in Newcastle and Tyneside and Durham, but very much around community development, neighbourhood management. So I was a bit of a shock to the council because they kept referring to me as being pink and fluffy, because all we wanted to talk about was making things cleaner, safer and greener. But our social value journey really started in about 2012, where we were involved in a Interreg 4C project. So obviously we were great supporters of all the EU funding, and we used to join in as much as we possibly could. And the Interreg project that we were involved in was called Verso. Doesn't stand for anything, but it was basically a project that was aimed at looking at volunteering as a genuine way back into employment. It was led by the University of Aarhus in Denmark, and we had, you know, partners across Europe, like you do if you run an Interreg project. So we were working with people from Greece and Spain and the Netherlands, Germany, amongst others. And the reason that the conversation started was we had a very nice gentleman called David from Budapest Business School, who was charged with evaluating the work that we were doing on this project. And he was presenting how we were going to measure this in a very economic way. And part of his presentation was to explain that we also, within our measurement, had to compensate the husband for the amount of time the wife would be away from home while she was volunteering. And we sort of asked how many hours a day are we talking about, and he explained 8. So he lost 90% of the room, who were all women who haven't done 8 hours of housework in their 8 hours a day's worth of housework in their homes since the 1950s probably. Anyway, it became clear that the measurement that was going to be used wasn't ideal, but also we were a victim of the time as well, because during the delivery of the project, austerity started to hit. So there was a economic crisis across Europe. Greece virtually went bankrupt. The Spanish unemployment rates rose to something like 25%. So it was really hard to prove the value of the volunteering project, because nobody ended up getting into work because there was no work to be had. Anyway, because of that work, that's how we started our conversation with Ivan and Jessica from Rose Regeneration. And at the time, I basically said to them, what we want is social return on investment for dummies, because at the time it wasn't quite so embedded, certainly within councils, and it was seen as a sort of very soft measured, thing for the voluntary sector to do. But that's how we started our journey. Did we move on the slide, Andrea? I think you've moved on too far, haven't you? No? Okay. Anyway, so we started literally with 50 proxies. They were very robust academic proxies, and they had been researched by a gentleman from, I want to say, University of Bath. Ivan will correct me if I'm wrong. And he was a specialist in happiness. It didn't escape my notice that I don't think he smiled once during our first meeting, but anyway, that's by the by. So that's where the social value engine was born. And at the same time, back home, austerity was hitting in a big way. Councils were having to make massive cost savings, cutting services, reducing costs, rationalising jobs. And our experience was that we had a team of people that were referred to as community partnerships. And at the time, there was a number of community partnership officers who were working with elected members and town and parish councils to address local issues. So anyone who has done any community engagement or any consultation will know that dog poo, litter, antisocial behaviour and young people hanging around will be in the top 5 of any consultation. And they're the sort of things that are important to residents, but you will struggle to find an economic value to those problems being solved. The community partnership team delivered a range of interventions, including, youth activity, community safety work, stuff to improve health and well-being, all really worthy and important interventions, but very hard to measure on an economic scale. So when we sat in front of an overview and scrutiny review panel, the team, who I was only managing temporarily, but their previous management, they hadn't measured anything. So they might have measured an output. And I used the story of, there was a mums group, a mums running group, which at the time, they weren't quite as common as they are now, but and they were in a rural area struggling to find a safe place to go running with their 3-wheeled buggies. So the team got together with, the traffic team and all the various, the parish councils, and created a safe running space for them. And, I was asked, well, so what difference does that make? And we all know, reducing social isolation, improve confidence, helping women to sort of, get their self-esteem back so that they can go back to work, anything that looks at improving mental and physical health, all brilliant outcomes, but they don't have an economic measure. So when it comes to cost cutting, it's very difficult to prove the value. So the outcome was that it was deemed that the team was an expensive luxury almost. and ended up being disbanded. So the other key step along our journey was that I was lucky enough to be accepted on the council's Masters in Public Leadership, which was delivered by Birmingham University. So we used the social value topic as my dissertation, and that enabled me to engage with a lot of senior managers to try and understand the interest or the sort of feeling there was for measuring social value. And honestly, at the time, it was quite difficult. You know, I wasn't pushing on any open doors. Quite a lot of people said, why would we until we're forced? I was fortunate enough that my executive director was, you know, saw the value of this work and was very keen and championed it and supported it. And we did find some key senior managers who were interested in it. But generally, the response was, we wouldn't do it until we have to. There was very few people who felt that we should be doing it. Obviously, at this time as well, there was a white paper brought out, so that the government had started to explain to people why they should be including social value within their procurement. But our journey was more about being able to prove the value of work that we were delivering on a day-to-day basis. You know, I was quite often referred to as being pink and fluffy, because the work that we were doing was looking at reducing mental health, people being better connected to their communities, you know, people having more pride in their community, which is now, you know, a levelling up priority. But back then it was seen as not something that it was soft. So the challenge was finding a way of measuring those intangible outcomes, the things that are important to residents, and make a real difference to people's lives, but you can't measure them on an economic scale. So we continued to develop our our tool, which originally started out, quite frankly, as a spreadsheet. Luckily, we continued our journey with Rosary Generation, and we developed the social value engine, which became an online tool. We still made sure that our proxies were robust and they could be, you know, challengeable. All of them are linked to either academic research or government recommended proxies. And that's part of the key with, you know, being able to measure your social value. You've got to make sure that your proxies are robust. We also had the opportunity to test the tool out on a small number of projects within the voluntary and community sector. And one of those was a refugee project that was being delivered in Goole. And the report, the value of the work that they were doing came out really high. It got me into a bit of trouble with the council because they didn't really want that to be seen as a good project. However, that charity then used their social value report as part of the evidence for a Reaching Communities bid, and they ended up being given £250,000 to continue to deliver the work. So that really sort of hammered home for us why we were doing it, because if it's going to help voluntary sector organisations to gain external funding that's going to help us deliver frontline services, why wouldn't you? So that's the point at which we then started to gain some traction amongst our internal colleagues as well as our external colleagues. So Andrea will start to just give you some background on some of the stuff that we then delivered.
Great. Thanks, Helena. Yeah, so as Helena said, from this kind of point forward, I was very much involved in, utilising the social value engine across many different teams in the council. So I'm just going to give you a kind of selection of the different work that we did. So this particular project was with our forward planning and housing strategy team, looking at the rough sleeper support service. So this was a joint contract between ourselves at East Riding and Hull City Council, working with Emmaus. And Emmaus were delivering this rough sleeper support service. But what was quite interesting about this particular project and their kind of USP was around the use of champions. So they had a number of champions that were actually living at an Emmaus residential site, which actually was situated in Hull, but they were all ex-rough sleepers, and they were very much involved with this delivery of this project. And that kind of boosted that kind of additional social value. And lots of the outcomes were around kind of training, improved confidence, well-being, and some of those champions that were involved with supporting rough sleepers actually then went on to get employment and jobs in the future. I'll just move on. So this particular project, that was working with our community safety partnership. So that's within our housing, transport and public protection service. And this particular project was quite unique at the time. It's in 2016, working with Humberside Police and ourselves at the council. And it was a unique partnership to enable agencies to work differently. So it was sort of creating a very different culture, really embedding those two agencies together. They were actually based in the same building, and they were particularly looking at people that were repeat calls for service in the police. And that could be people with very complex issues, could be domestic abuse, could have been alcohol and drug abuse or mental health issues. And the conversations at the time was around, particularly with the police, in terms of the number of cases that they were actually dealing with. Through this particular project, they were actually dealing with less numbers of cases, but they were going into much more depth. They were working with them much more intensively to be able to give them all the extra support. So that was what was very different about this project. And I think that was quite challenging, particularly in the police force, where at the time they were most sort of focused on the number of cases that they were dealing with. So this was quite a sort of culture change, and you can see in some of the kind of different outcomes, the layering of the outcomes that have started to come through here. You can see some of it is around beneficiaries, some of it is around the partners, and some of it's actually very specifically around those kind of frontline staff outcomes. And you'll see this is kind of the first time we really started to layer some of those outcomes, but you'll see it much more in some other projects that we talk about later on down the line. So this particular project, we were working with Children's Family and Schools, so completely different service, working with children's centres. And I think most people will be familiar with, or if they're not, when you have an infant, a baby, you can access these massage courses across our council. I think you can in many councils now. It's free, it's a completely free course, and the babies are all under 6 months old. So the Children's Centre and Children, Family and Schools, they were particularly interested in looking at what social value were for these infant massage courses. Because they were free, they were offered out, so you got lots of different types of people attending, lots of different areas. Some were within some of our most deprived areas, but actually what they were able to see was actually there was more social value within these deprived areas. So I think as they've gone on, they've been able to actually more target those areas. So through doing this process, they actually were able to kind of tweak change and develop their project going forward, just because of the information that they learn by carrying out this particular calculation. And then this is with infrastructure and facilities. Your Hub, if you haven't heard of it, that's public sector that deliver construction projects across Yorkshire and Humber. It's managed by a number of different officers from 5 lead authorities across the Humber. And Your Hub is made up of various different elements of the framework. There's Your Build, which is for building projects, Your Civil, which is a framework for civil engineering, and Your Consult, which is a consultancy service for construction. But within Your Hub, there's what we call the Your Hub for Good Fund, which is a community fund that helps support regeneration projects across the Humber region. So this particular Your Hub for Good fund we were looking at were grants of up to £10,000, and we did this analysis in 2017 to 2018, and we looked at 32 projects that were awarded across that period. And then there was actually only £300,000 of direct funding, but you can see there that the direct costs are much more vast than that, because that's the total cost of actually delivering the projects, not just what the fund has given. But you can see here that the social value per pound spent is a very good return, £6.46 for that. So that was the first time really we started to look at social value within our construction framework, and with that service as well. So just to give you, I could probably go on all day actually talking about the various different things that we've done, but I wanted to just pick out a few others that might be of interest to people on the webinar today. So the first one here is, and it's a fairly new one actually, we've been working with our commercialisation team, and we've been particularly working with our school traded service. So what we were doing here, we have a catering service, which is a traded service offered to our schools, and our schools can go externally. They don't need to use our traded service. They can go wherever they like. But one of the schools, actually Cowick Primary School, if you know it, right down low into East Riding, right on the borders of Hull and Goole area. What happened is, I think it was about 2019, we had some fairly devastating flooding in the area, and it hit that particular area really quite hard. And they weren't able to provide school meals to children because the kitchen was completely flooded, and they weren't able to do it. And they were having to utilise other kitchens from neighbouring schools to bring in their school meals. Then the pandemic hit, so that neighbouring school then wasn't able to then bring in the school meals. So they kind of quickly realised that they really needed to put something else in place. So they worked with our school trading services, who then helped them manage the process of getting some additional funding, purchasing and installing the kitchen. Well, it's actually a micro kitchen because the school is actually really small. They supported a new online payment system for parents. And there was a lot of access to working with parents around providing healthier meals as part of that kind of decision process. So we looked at the social value that particular project had taken place, and that's now gone on for that kind of traded services to now look at social value across some of their other traded services that they offer. Culture and customer services. We've been doing. Oh, I think somebody's not on mute there. Sorry. I'll carry on regardless. Culture and customer services we've tended to work with culture and customer services and health and wellbeing team is almost like clusters, really. So we do, training with a whole group of people within these services, and they become champions in their own right for those services. So we've been looking at projects with those two teams around, one's called Cuppa and a Chorus. So people come along, it's reduction in socialization, they have a cup of tea and they sing. Actually, I was looking at a footage of the singing. It's a bit dubious, actually, the singing, but they all look like they're having a really lovely time. And other projects like beach yoga for the health and well-being team, and other projects like pain management as well. There's a particular project around escape pain, so that's very much in that kind of improving health and well-being for people. The adult services, they've got this local coordination service, which is actually delivered by British Red Cross. And that's really about supporting our residents to live an independent lives and making sure that they're plugged in to all the different sort of services that would be available to them. And then the last two on here, I wanted to put on because they were a little bit different, but the construction of the Holderness crematorium, which is now actually in place, we were looking at it at its very early phase around what kind of services they'd be able to provide local residents. So very much around that kind of bereavement, helping people with loss, mental health. So we were looking that in terms of when they were constructing it, but kind of looking beyond what was going to happen once this crematorium is built. And then the last one, not least, and I think probably Helena could talk about this way more because she was very much in the centre of our COVID activities. And probably if you're from local authority on the call here today, maybe a similar sort of situation. We obviously developed community hubs across the county to help respond to the pandemic. So we looked at the social value for those community hubs at the time that COVID was taking place. So there's a big kind of selection, and you can see the wide selection of services and examples across the teams that we work with at East Riding. It's a never-ending growing list, but we are working really hard to sort of set up these very key people across these services, because we couldn't spend every day, every minute across all these different teams. So what we're trying to do is set up a way of working that they become the key people in these services who then help and train their members of the team. Okay, I'll just pass back to Helena, who's going to talk about some other specific projects and programs that we've delivered.
So what we've found is that people now want to talk to us about evaluating work that they've delivered, but it generally happens after they've delivered it. One of the things that we recognised that we wanted to start doing was making sure that people were forecasting for their outcomes. So starting to think ahead of time what outcomes and outputs that they are likely to be delivering, and how they should be starting to collect the evidence and the data to be able to prove those outcomes. We did this on our community-led local development project. So anyone who was involved in a community-led local development project will remember that it was a jointly funded project. So it was some ESF money and ERDF money, and we had been promised by government that they would make it really easy to deliver, and they would hide the wiring, and we were given all sorts of promises. However, didn't quite work out like that for us. It felt like we had twice the rules and twice the pressure from managing authorities. The other thing that happened to us in the middle of COVID, in the middle of the delivery of this, was COVID hit, which as many of you will know, affected face-to-face delivery in a big way. So our CLLD project was actually delivered jointly by us and Scarborough Borough Council, but East Riding were the lead authority. What we wanted to do on CLLD, because the outcomes were very much about getting people into jobs, but actually, you know, if you think about it, as part of getting people into jobs, there will be real changes and impacts on individuals, and we wanted to try and capture that as part of the delivery of this project. So what we did was we made sure that every project that we funded through this programme had a forecast of outcomes and outputs that it was going to deliver, and that we supported them to measure the social value of what they were delivering. And then we also measured the social value of the overall programme so that we could calculate, you know, the impact that it made overall. So and obviously by forecasting, the other thing that happens is you also discover unintended outcomes that you manage to be able to evidence. So the beauty, can you just go back one slide, because I don't remember the figures off the top of my head. So obviously, you know, there was an awful lot of money given to us to deliver this project. As I was saying, the big problem was COVID hit, and that affected delivery because people couldn't do face-to-face delivery. When you're working with people who are far from the labour market, doing things virtually does not help. Job centre closed down, people stopped being forced to get involved in any type of employability projects. So, you know, the parameters that we were delivering became more and more challenging. However, you know, our because we'd started to look at this from the point of view of we wanted to look at wider outcomes, by the end of the programme, we, you know, we were low on our outputs from the point of view of getting people into jobs. However, we were able to evidence an awful lot of other value that had been created, you know, which included things like people feeling more confident, less social isolation, mental health had been dealt with. So, you know, as an overall programme, we were able to show a much stronger impact than if we just measured the outputs that the programme had wanted us to deliver. We can share these impact cards with you so that you can look at them in more detail if it's of interest. The other example of where we started to look at how we measure our social impact. 2.5 years ago, we were given a budget uplift through a members' initiative, and part of that was we were given £200,000 to set up a community fund. And that community fund at the time was very much aimed at funding voluntary organisations to help them open up again, to get people back out into the community. So it was post-pandemic, people were still a bit frightened to be going out. Lots of things had been mothballed, and we needed to sort of do a bit of pump priming to support the community and voluntary sector to open their doors again effectively. So we were initially given £200,000. We measured the social value of all the activity that we delivered, produced a report. To this day, we were then given more money because we were able to show the social value. And at this point in time, those figures are a bit wrong. But to date, we have actually been able to get £750,000 directly out to our community and voluntary sector through this work by showing the impact of what we've done. So, you know, it might have cost the council some money, but we've been able to show what a difference that money has made. this is just another one. So the other thing that we're now doing is we are, as with probably everybody else who's on the call who's from a council, we've all been given a UK shared prosperity allocation, and are trying to deliver against that, trying to desperately get the money spent. We started with a very late start, which I'm sure everybody else was experiencing. And we had a bit of an issue with the outputs and outcomes. They're not clear. Some of the outcomes aren't outcomes, but we could take that forever. So again, what we've done with our UK Shared Prosperity and our Rural England Prosperity Fund is not only have we set out what outputs and outcomes that the government have set out that we want to deliver, but we're also ensuring that we're focusing the social value, we're forecasting the social value of all of the projects so that we can show the impact. So this impact card here is just an example of an event that was held in 2022 at one of the local churches in Beverley. So anyone who knows Beverley knows that it's a very beautiful market town in the East Riding. It has a minster, but it also has a very lovely, it's bookended by a minster and a very beautiful church called St Mary's Without. And St Mary's Without, we helped to fund them to put on the Festival of Angels, which was a stunning display of angels. But the aim was that it was going to improve footfall to the high street, you know, contribute to the visitor economy. And this is something that we get all the time. Well, what difference does, you know, putting on a festival or an event make? And the beauty of this is that, you know, on our measurement, for every pound that we've invested, we've returned £5.56 of social value. But we've contributed to a number of our headlines around the Bristol Accord, which is the thing that we use to measure. The Bristol Accord shows what makes up a sustainable community. So it's contributed to the economy, the environment, social and cultural activity, transport, connectivity, services and governance. So it's just a bit of a, you know, example of the sort of thing that we are doing to try and show the impact of what we're doing. So that's sort of 11 years worth of our life. I feel very old now because we are now coming round again to financial squeeze for all councils. You know, everybody's starting to worry about where the next, how we're going to continue to deliver services. You know, councils having to issue 151 notices and all the rest of it. So the point at which we are now at is we are going to be embedding social value in all programmes that are delivered within the regeneration funding team. So no matter where the money comes from in the future, whether it's money that we bid for from government or whether it's money that the government just decides to give us, because that happens a bit. Anybody who had to deal with reopening high street funding and welcome back funding will know the pain that could cause when the government kindly give you money in a very short time span to spend it when you didn't ask for it. We've now written our social value policy, and that is going to be ratified, is going to Cabinet in November. We've developed an e-learning package which will be launched at the same time as our social value policy, which is a really simple introduction into why you should be measuring the social value. And our second module to that, which is in train and should be delivered soon, is being focused around the social value engine and how to use it. Obviously, the social value work also fits in really well with our aspiration to look at community wealth building, and we are currently looking at projects that can be delivered that will create wealth in our communities and help to deliver some of the solutions. We grow our own solutions to some of the challenges that we are suffering from in our communities. And obviously our partnership with Rose Regeneration has now meant that we have created a separate company called the Social Value Engine Limited, and East Riding remain a shareholder in that. There you go. I think that brings us to the end. We could talk forever, but it's very boring, so I'm very sorry.
So that was absolutely excellent. Thank you so much. It's Rab speaking here. Now, I'm not quite sure about the mute. I'm hoping that people can put in Q&A, and if you've got any questions, that would be great. I'm trying to unmute everyone at the moment. This will mute all presenters in the meeting, but you, I don't want to do that. So if there's any questions, please could you pop them in the Q&A? And just my question, Helena, at the end of your first session, you talked a little bit about one of the things that really got you traction was the ability to help the voluntary organisations you work with to receive funding. And I wonder maybe if you could just expand on that a little bit more, because that sounds quite interesting to me.
Well, what the CEO of that organisation said to me was that the work that we'd done measuring their social value had enabled them to articulate so much better, what they were delivering, but more importantly, what they were expecting the impact of that work would be. And anybody who's written any funding bid, never mind about a national lottery reaching communities funding bid, will know how challenging it is to be able to explain what a difference the work that your organisation is doing and how that makes it head and shoulders above all the other people who are applying for money. And that was the key thing for her, was they were able to articulate it within the funding bid, but then they also were able to supply the lottery with a copy of the impact card, which just made it more impactful. And, you know, the lottery, she actually says the lottery were really interested in the social value angle of the bid, but she was absolutely convinced that that was what gave them that edge above all the other projects. And it's getting more and more competitive for voluntary and community sector organisations to be able to gain external funding. You know, we need voluntary sector organisations because they deliver fantastic key frontline services for us. They're in the hearts of our communities, but nobody's got the money to give the, you know, for them to be able to sustain their activity. So for them to be able to articulate the real difference that they make helps them to be able to continue to sustain those services.
Yeah, good. Thanks, Helena. And thanks, Ricardo. I'm glad to see that the Q&A is working, so everyone's free to use it. And he's popped a wee question in. Does social value feature strongly in your equality impact assessments?
Good question.
That's a very good question. It's probably not an area that has been included within our quality impact assessments. And you've actually just given us more work to go back and talk to Martin Batstone about that. Not, if I'm honest, not currently, no. But it is something that needs to be addressed. I think things like quality impact, you see, part of the problem is it's not a must do at the moment. It's still an option. And as I say, when I started this work very early on, you know, I was told by quite a lot of senior managers, including those that do the measuring, that until we're forced to do it, we're not going to do it. So it's really difficult to make people take notice of social value. The people who've come on board have seen the value of doing it and are reaping those rewards. However, once our social value policy is set, you know, has been approved by Cabinet, we will start to see a bit of a change there. And, you know, I keep telling people that we didn't start this journey because the government brought out a white paper. We are approaching this very much from a values base, because we know that a lot of the work that we do, that you know, interventions that improve those pink and fluffy outcomes are important, and we need to be able to put an economic value on them. But we will go away and have a conversation with the team who look at our equalities impact assessment. Because it should be, you're right.
I'm just wondering whether Ricardo has done that where he is.
Yes.
Can we ask them the question, Ralph?
So I seem to be incapable of muting people, but if you wanted to pop in a comment, Ricardo, I'd be very happy to pick up on it for you. And if there's any other questions, please fire them in. I mean, it sounds to me as though, it needs a leader. You've got all the sort of change management issues. You need to sell internally. You need to sell externally. You need to convince people. And as you said at the beginning, Helena, you're not experts, but you obviously got some what would you say, scars on your back in terms of moving that along. So I suppose particularly for the council people, I mean, I'm springing this one on you, I know, but is there 2 or 3 things that you'd say, things that maybe where you went down a wrong path, where with hindsight, I don't know, is it go and grab the leader of the council and, any insights about how you can move this forward more quickly?
I think for me, because it's been a bit of a journey that has gained traction, we started small and grew up. We didn't try to go big and risk blowing up. So, if we had started this journey by going straight into the chief exec and telling them how wonderful this was, that would have been a risk because it might not have been as successful. So the fact that we have started the journey and by winning hearts and minds and slowly starting to influence sort of key colleagues across the council, and also not rushing at it, so that because there would have been far too much work to do if everybody decided they wanted to jump on the bandwagon at the same time. So that was, and yes, I do have some scars. Some work that I did got me into real trouble with senior managers within the directorates, because they don't always want us to show the value of work that's being done, but especially by external organisations. So yeah, I mean, there's lots of stories I could tell you, but I usually only tell them when I have a drink in my hand, if I'm honest.
I was just going to add to that a bit, Rab, if I can. From my experience of trying to work internally with some services, they do. The first thing, they'll get real excited and they'll be like, yeah, we'll measure the whole service. So I think in my experience, what we've tried to do, and I've had some scars around that, is really it's trying to if it's the first time they're looking at it, they really need to start with something that's kind of sensible, appropriate, not necessarily small, but something that's manageable, I think, because otherwise they just kind of get lost in what they're trying to do. So I think it's much easier for them to look at something that's appropriate and manageable, learn from that, and then they can start to apply it to various different things.
Yeah. And I think it fits as well with historically the way that evaluation itself has been carried out. Everyone thinks about evaluation being done at the end. And you can't carry out an evaluation unless you know what evidence that you're collecting. So what we've had people come to us and go, oh, we've been doing this for 10 years. Can you now do a social value impact on us? And I'm like, really hard to retrofit, especially if you haven't collected any evidence. So, when you go to people and they say, oh, that they'll recount all the stuff that they've done, and then we go, so how have you evidenced that? That's really difficult. Whereas the people that we've engaged with at the beginning of the journey, and done a theory of change with them, works out what they think their outputs and outcomes are going to be, talks about how they're going to measure that, talks about how they're going to engage their stakeholders, because that's a key thing with proving social value. It's about the impact to the individuals, and you need to engage those people in collecting your data and your evidence. It's it's not easy, it's hard work, but if you are doing evaluation properly, you will be collecting all of that anyway. And then the beauty of the social value engine is we take your evidence and your data and then run it through our engine and turn it into a monetary figure. And it makes it simpler.
Excellent insights. Thank you so much. Now, Ricardo's come back to us, so I'm going to pop over to him in a minute. But I'm just sort of, from what you said there, almost you provide a service to the community organisations in your geography to, and some, I mean, I'm a trustee of a charity who get really fed up because they've got various councils they work with and they all ask them to report in different ways and it takes a whole lot of time. But you're actually going out, you're following the money if you want. You say, we'll give you this money, and we're not going to give you 6 things that you need to report every week. We're going to talk to you and work out what outcomes are you aiming to achieve. If that's what you think, how are you going to measure it? How do you pivot if things change? You're actually providing the council, your council is providing a consultancy service as well as the tool that sits behind it, which I think is quite interesting. But that's just me. Now, I've got a couple more, and because I've got a thing from Ricardo and then Ivan's got a comment, so hold on. Can I ask what? Oh, okay, sorry, actually, there's a few.
So Ivan wants to know the size of the team, Rab. So Andrea, do you want to tell everybody how tiny the team is?
Okay, yes, it's not large. So there's me, and I sort of lead on the social value as well as other things. But then in my team, I have three full-time members of staff who are there. So two of them are very specifically focused on social value, and one that does social value and some other works that we do across the team. But the two that are predominantly working on it full time, they are completely inundated really with requests coming forward. So we almost have a bit of a waiting list, as it were, where we kind of triage people. So if people are first time at it, obviously that takes a little bit more time and support for them. And what we try to do is, like I said earlier, we try to do it as a kind of team thing, because otherwise what we do is we end up with like one person wanting to do one project, and then 6 other people in the team then come to us and say, oh, we want to do it as well. So we very quickly learned that actually doing it across a whole team or service was the much more best way of doing it going forward. But yeah, we're a fairly small team, but we're very we work with pace and enthusiasm, which is Helena's best that's your line, isn't it, Helena? So we very much are trying to work to the needs of people, but as you can imagine, we do almost have to kind of triage it a little bit because we're so small.
Excellent, thanks very much. Now, just got a few minutes left. Ricardo, forgive me, I'm going to just jump to the question that came in from Rosalind just after yours, which I think might link, but if that's okay, if we've got time, we'll come back to yours. But can I ask what the monetary numbers represents? I know the social value engine works out a number, but is that number the amount of money saved, or is it the amount of money that benefits the community? Is it more a holistic measure? Sorry if you've already explained this.
Yeah, no, that's a good question. Yeah, do you want me to do it, Helena, or so it is the monetary figure is around the benefit of those outcomes to the community and the stakeholders that have been included or involved in the programme or the project or the service or whatever it is that you're measuring. Go on, Helena.
I was just going to say, I mean, without going into loads of detail about how it works, obviously when you're trying to calculate the social value, you have to take into account the inputs, so the cost of delivering the service, and the outputs, so whatever the outcomes are, and then those outcomes are tracked against academically robust proxies that give us a figure. So, for example, an easy one to use as an example is there is actually a figure that you would put on suicide prevented. It's quite a big figure. I'm not going to talk about it because it sounds like it, but if you had a suicide mental health service that you can evidence had prevented a suicide, then you've got a monetary number on the value of that. Whether you agree with the value or not is a different thing, but it is, you know, it's a proxy that we use that is challengeable and academically robust.
Good, thank you, sir. Thank you.
I mean,
so
the
much.
best advice is to come to Andrea's next webinar and she'll explain to you about the social value and how we make it work.
Yeah, I was just going to say that we'll go into a bit more detail as how we actually go about doing the calculation with the tool and what that actually means at the end of it. So that's the next webinar that we're doing.
We got Ricardo's answer.
Folks, can you still hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, we can hear you,
Okay.
Rob.
I lost the screen. So I'm in twice now. Can I leave you folks to finish off, and you'll see Ricardo's question in the Q&A.
Oh, let me
Okay.
look at Ricardo's question then.
Hello?
Sorry, I can't even find it.
Yeah, I can't see it either.
Oh, Ivan, thank you. University of Gloucester, not Bath. I should have checked my facts, shouldn't I?
Oh yeah, I can see it now. It says we look at the Fairer Scotland duty social economic impact as part of our, but we don't have what you do in place in terms of sticker value on stuff. Oh, okay.
No.
Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you, Ricardo. That's quite helpful. Thank you.
Okay, so it probably brings us to the end if there's no more questions. So Andrew, do you want to put your slide up about your next webinar, just so we can remind people? You'd be pleased to know I'm not doing it. Andrea and Jennifer from our team will be doing another webinar on the 12th of December between 10 and 11. And these topics weren't set by us, they were set by our lovely colleagues at the Social Value Engine. But how does East Riding of Yorkshire Council utilise the digital tool that they have jointly developed and part own, the Social Value Engine, to maximise positive impacts in their investment in their communities? So within that, we'll go into more detail about the Social Value Engine and how it works for us. But that brings us just to say thank you very much, I think.
Yeah, so thanks so much for coming on. Folks, rather than maybe sending out the slides to all of you, you might not be interested. If you just drop an email to us well, actually, we'll send the slides out to all the attendees after the meeting. We hope to see you at the next session. I can't actually see you now, but thank you very much for coming along, and thanks very much to Andrea and Helena for a really interesting talk. It was just great. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Cheers. Bye-bye. Hello. Anyone still left in the call?
I'm still here, Rab. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
I've stayed on.
Yes, thank you, Andrea. That was very good. I can see there's still 3 other people here, but anyway. Oh yeah, Maddie's
stop
here.
The recording. Stop the recording.
Yeah, I'm sorry, folks. I'm a little bit blind at the moment. I can hear you, but I can't. I'm not. I don't. It disappeared from my screen.